Welcome to Make It Happen Mondays. This is John Barrows. Hopefully you all had a fantastic weekend. I obviously did because my Patriots won number 6. So all those haters out there, sorry, but we're still here. I'd love to introduce my guest today because I'm really looking forward to this conversation of perception, reality, and sales and doing what you're supposed to do versus what you should do. I'd like to introduce Melanie. So Melanie from Spekit. So you want to introduce everybody of where you're coming from?
Hi everyone, I'm Melanie. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Spekit. Spekit is a just-in-time learning solution that embeds your knowledge and training when and where your employees need it. And it was really created from my own experience managing Salesforce and managing business operations at a fast-growing startup. And we really had a lot of challenges around, data quality and training and onboarding. And the root of the problem was that, our training couldn't keep up. Salesforce was constantly changing, and so we didn't have a way to easily update our manuals and our PDFs and LMS. And then our sales folks wanted to focus on selling and meeting their lofty goals. And unfortunately, all the training was in an email somewhere or external to their workflows. So it was really built around those challenges I had.
I love it. And I mean, you and I could have a much bigger conversation, I think, about just-in-time learning and where that whole thing is, because we're in lockstep on that. But I think what really struck me about this conversation that we're going to have is your journey to being a CEO and kind of, and being that lead salesperson that every CEO needs to be, and the perception versus the reality of it. Right. So talk to me a little bit about, before we were jumping on board here, you kind of said you launched Spekit at Dreamforce this past year.
Yeah.
So talk me through that journey. Well, actually, let me back up a little bit. Why just start it? You said you started it, but you went from, was it Realty Share?
Yeah, Realty Shares to Spekit.
And what was the impetus for that? Like, you wanted to, all right, you were a chief of staff there, right?
Yeah.
And first of all, I'm always curious on what makes people decide to start their own business. What was that driver? Was it like you saw an opportunity or you had an itch to do something?
That's a great question, because I feel, when you talk to a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of them always knew that they wanted to start a company. Yep. And that wasn't really part of the story and vision. I always saw myself, eventually kind of climbing the corporate ladder and being in some sort of leadership position. But I think the desire to start a company started after working at a number of startups. I worked at a technology company right when cannabis got legalized in Colorado, and that was really exciting, getting my toes wet there. And then when I moved to San Francisco and worked for Realty Shares, I joined when it was super early on, around 15 employees. And the best analogy that I've heard someone else say about startups is that it's really playing a game of shoots and ladders. What's so unique about Silicon Valley is that you're not steady, growing steadily within the company. If you take whatever opportunity comes your way, if you show initiative, the great thing about startups is there's a whole lot of problems to solve, right? There's no process in place. You're constantly hiring. Everything's constantly changing as your business evolves, and you're really learning by doing. And, I kind of took the approach where I'm just going to take whatever comes my way. I'm happy to raise my hand whenever there was a problem to solve. And through that, I really, got excited about, or got in that mindset of constantly identifying opportunities to solve. And the biggest one was obviously around that training issue that was pretty constant for us. And so that's when, I started really thinking through, what would this ideal solution look like? Because I'd spent a lot of time, in business operations evaluating solutions like that. So I'd spent a lot of time seeing what was currently out there and then envisioning what I would want out of the ideal solution. And it was only when my now co-founder, Zari, I pulled her aside. She's a rock star product manager at the company. I was like, hey, you've seen this problem from the technology side and of the company. I've seen it from the end user side. Let's spend a little bit of time just not anything serious, just playing around with the ideation. And as soon as, she's like, hey, I'm not going to spend any time on this unless we do it right. Let's start doing surveys. Let's get out there. Let's read competitive app reviews, identify the weaknesses there. And so it was after doing quite a bit of research and realizing it wasn't just our problem we were solving. There was a bigger problem to solve. We were like, hey, let's do something about this.
I love it. And did you get funding or did you bootstrap this from the start?
Yeah. So Zara and I were along the same mindset where we didn't want to bring on funding until we were clear that we'd identified not only the right problem to solve, but the right solution as well. So we did invest both personally, and and not take a salary for quite a bit of time. And then we took on a bit of angel funding, because the reality is, when you're building a software, there's a lot of upfront costs from a development standpoint. There's marketing as well. In order for us to do Dreamforce, that's a pretty penny there. So we did take on some angel investment, and now we're starting to think about, what's next from that standpoint.
I love it. So like I said, I always love the journey into entrepreneurship, because it's either you had it, like I never knew I had it in me until I was introduced to it, and I'm like, wait a minute, I like this a lot better than that. So I'm gonna go do that no matter what, right? Cool. So you started this out, you hit Dreamforce, and I think this is what really struck me about when we were talking was, it's still, as somebody who's been in sales for 22 years, okay? Yeah. I've been selling now 23. The switch, I still get people saying we need to switch to solution sales. Now, solution sales came out back in the 90s or something like that, or the 80s, where it was like, hey, stop the product pitch and really solution sell, where you ask the questions and then you delivered what the client's asking for, right? But there's still a massive group of people, and I think it comes from perception reality, that think the product is what sells. So could you help me understand kind of your perception of how you thought you needed to sell going into Dreamforce, and then the reality of what you got hit with?
Yeah, absolutely. So Dreamforce was our big launch pad. We went all in, because my mentality was, well, if we don't do it this year, then we have to wait for another year. And because our product was focused on Salesforce, that was just the natural launching pad. And it was a great experience for us. We got a ton of interest, people walking by. Dreamforce is just exceptional from that standpoint. You actually get to speak directly to the decision makers, which I've now learned is a lot harder than most people think. And so it was exciting, because after Dreamforce, we had a ton of leads, and we'd actually done demos for almost everyone, because our sales team was so small. I said, we don't have time to follow up with all these people that we just got random business cards from. I need someone to have at least seen 10 seconds of the product, so that they at least know how to differentiate, my email from the 30 emails that are going to follow after Dreamforce. And it was great. We got a ton of demo requests, and I got really excited because I was so busy, right? It was finally, we were getting our pipeline filled, and I was doing, on Sundays, 8 to 10 demos a day, which, sounds great. But the reality was that, I wasn't spending any time preparing for them. I was just kind of going into them still with, thoughts from the last demo, going straight into the next one. And, because I hadn't really studied what a proper sale looked like, I was 100% focused on features. I'd go in and I'd ask a couple questions. Now I realize they were all closed-ended. Like, do you have documentation solutions? Do you have training problems? All yes, no answers, more so to check the box that I'd asked a few discovery questions, rather than actually getting to the root of, well, why are they interested? Is it because of onboarding? Is it because of training? Is it change? What is the root of the business problem and the value they're trying to solve? And I'd go in super excited and show them everything our product could do. Because, my mindset was, well, if they see every single feature and all the different things and all the different problems we can solve, it's going to be an easy sell. And the reality was quite different, because, one of the issues is we had two very different audiences. One was more technical, one was more, sales and learning. And I was selling the same pitch to both. and everything from the words I was choosing to the stories that, I in reality wasn't telling, but every example I was giving was trying to meet this kind of general use case, rather than being very specific to the value that particular individual wanted. After about a month of doing that and not really seeing any tangible results, I wasn't doing the proper follow-ups. There's a ton of things I was doing all wrong. From a selling perspective, not sending follow-up meetings. I finally was kind of at a breaking point, because I was exhausted. I felt like I'd been doing so much, but not really seeing the results to show for it. And the conversations I was having weren't really getting to that next level. And so I decided to go to the Sales 3.0 conference, and, for two reasons. One, the audience was mostly sales and sales operations folks. So I figured, well, this might be a really good way to kind of understand their thought process, and have some just real conversations with folks. But the other one is just to learn. I finally came to the realization of how much I had to learn about selling, right? It wasn't something that I could just wing and pick up. And one of the first, the opening keynote talked about, the they'd done this big survey of sales folks, and they'd identified the weakest group, and the highest correlating factor amongst all of them was the desire to be liked. That was the one thing that prevented them from, following up properly, right? Because you don't want to be imposing, and that was definitely something I was doing. If someone had expressed interest, they thought that, they said they liked it, I'd follow up once, and then I didn't want to intrude on their busy day, right? I figured, oh, well, when they're interested, they'll come back. And I wasn't asking the hard questions. I wasn't getting to the point of, not only is this something that they like and that they're willing to see a demo for, but is this something that they're willing to prioritize, that they're willing to allocate budget to? And a really interesting moment happened when I was standing at a high top table surrounded by, 6 men in their like 40s, CEOs or kind of experts in the sales space. And they were all talking, and I was, trying to fit in and really, take part in the conversation. And then this one individual standing next to me, we kind of, started having our own conversation, and turns out he's actually a sales trainer and coach. And he asked me a very unique question, which was, when you're in the sales process, what energy do you lead with? Do you lead with your masculine or feminine energy? And, there was kind of a pause because I didn't know how to respond to that. I hadn't ever really thought about it. And so he gave me a couple examples. He's like, well, do you lead more with your confidence and assertiveness and put your best, foot forward, which would be more with your masculine energy? I was like, well, yeah, I guess that's what I've been trying to do, trying to fit into what the mold of a CEO selling to an enterprise looks like. And he's like, well, have you ever considered leading with your feminine energy instead? Because I sense this strong female energy from you, but you seem to be leading and trying to fit into this masculine energy instead. It's like, have you ever considered leading from, a place of trust and empathy and compassion and leading with that instead? And I was like, wow, I've never thought about that. And really from that point forward, that it struck a chord in me that I'd been trying so hard to fit into what I thought was a person selling sales, software versus what the reality was. People buy from people, and the more authentic I could be, the more myself I could be, which is more of a, nurturing and empathetic personality, that would, leads to some very different results. And so that was really the pivoting point for me.
So yeah, I find that fascinating. First of all, I think we should all lead a little bit more with our feminine side these days. But we were talking about how I wrote that post of stop doing what you're supposed to do. I think so many of us are caught up in what we think sales should be, or what we think we should be doing, or what we're being told to do. You know what I mean? And I know, look, as a young sales rep, for me, for some reason, I've always kind of had that inner pushback of, if I didn't think it ever made sense, I never had a problem saying it. It's like, I don't know, have you read Challenger Sale yet?
No, I have not. Writing that down.
Yeah. Read Challenger Sale. And there's 2 components of Challenger Sale. One is lead with insights, which is the whole idea of kind of educating your audience to say, hey, this is where just-in-time learning's going. This is what, attrition is causing, and this is how blah, blah, blah. But the other side is challenge, right? Is to actually push back on a client. And when you think that they're not looking at it the right way, you don't say this, but effectively what you think is, look, you make this decision once a year, maybe. I help people make this every day. Let me share with you when people make the right decision and the wrong decision. And for me, I've always kind of been inherently a challenger sales rep, because anytime I thought you were looking at it the wrong way, I would tend to push back and be like, help me understand. Like, most people that I talk to don't look at it that way. So could you, and then unraveling it that way. But I kind of fell into the same problem or kind of thing you did, which was early in my career, I thought the pitch was it. You know what I mean? Like the elevator pitch. You get the elevator pitch down, you just say it as many times until your ear bleeds, right? Or you just demo. So, you find the right client, you demo, and that's it. And this is where you might, I don't know if you read this one, but the word digest hit me strong. And I don't know if you heard this, but I think that's the killer word after every demo, is that after you do one of those canned piece of shit demos that you and I have done plenty of, that they come to you at the end and they say, wow, that was really impressive. I'm going to need a little time to digest what you just told me there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I tell everybody, if you hear that word at the end of one of your demos, you've done a miserable job. And I used to be so proud of myself because I'd walk out of those meetings being like, oh, what's up? I crushed that. Like, absolutely. And the dude would literally say, oh, I need to sign. And I said this one time coming out of a meeting. I said, these words legit came out of my mouth. I said, that dude, I was so excited, engineer with me. I said, that dude didn't even know what to do with the information I put in front of him. And as soon as I said that, like, this was my turning point, because my engineer looked at me and said, what? Even he knew that was a dumb, like, I'm like, wait, oh man, wait a minute. He didn't even know what to do with the, oh shit. Right? So now, right? So now talking about tailoring your pitch, and, you know, I talk about sell to the 20%, you know, there's really only 20% of what people buy of your shit. That's the only stuff they care about. So focus on that. But I love the idea of being your authentic self.
Yeah.
So how do you combine being your authentic self with the sales component of it, of the stuff that you know you need to do, like the follow-up, the prep, and those type of things? So talk to me a little bit about your journey of how you come, once that kind of light bulb went off of, you know what, I should stop trying to be somebody else of whoever I'm supposed to be. I want to be myself. But if you were yourself with no training and guidance or any of that from a sales standpoint, you would probably just have really good conversations with people that still wouldn't go anywhere because you wouldn't want to push them. You wouldn't want to follow, you know what I mean? So talk to me about what was the connection you made between the empathetic self and I know I need to have the foundational sales pieces in place here.
Yeah. So I think there's a couple different pieces to that. You know, one of it is, and I think you alluded to it, there's a strategy behind every sale, right? We can have a conversation all day and yeah, I'm good at having conversations. I can talk anyone's ear off.
Yep.
But at the end of the day, you know, there needs to be some sort of process that you're following. And actually where I observed one of the best sales processes was Drift. I'm a big fan of Guerrilla Drift. I think they're just an incredible company. And I just remember, you know, when I was working with our sales rep there, his name was Michael, he emailed me and it was just the most casual, you know, after I signed up, and it was just the most casual email, like, hey, saw you were checking out, you know, Drift, would love to find some time to connect about your problems. And, you know, I get hit up every day as a CEO, I'm sure you do too, with like all these sales pitches. And this is just 1 or 2 lines, super simple conversational tone. It's like, wow, yeah, I'm sure. Let's have a chat. And, you know, we went on the demo and it was the same. It was very conversational. You know, he put on the video, and that's one of the biggest lessons I learned is, as I was doing all these demos, I wasn't actually putting on the video. There was something that I felt uncomfortable, I think, putting on my video in the sales process. And so I wasn't seeing who I was speaking to either. You know, I could go off their LinkedIn profile, but if you look at my LinkedIn profile, I've got my arms crossed. I'm kind of in this, badass, tech pose, when in reality, I'm more of a jokester. And so I wasn't really building that authentic relationship at the start where, you know, when you smile with someone and you see that authentic smile, you already break down those barriers that are just so hard to do over the phone, no matter how crafted your pitch is, how good those questions are that you're asking. And honestly, that's one of my strengths. So anyway, so it was after going through that sales process, and what they did really well, you know, is there was clearly a sales process they were following. You know, after a demo, he sent me this personalized video of Drift with my logo. I was like, wow, this is really cool. Yeah. And then, you know, and then he put a little bit of pressure on me to get the sale done within a certain time frame. But I was bought in. You know, I wasn't just bought into the product, but I was bought into like that sales process that I was part of, you know, that relationship that I'd been building. And anyway, and that strung another chord with me of going back and looking at the emails I was sending after emails, which was, you know, again, I'd use some, you know, default yes or templates, like, here's what we talked about today. Here are the 3 features that we agreed would add value to your business. Yeah. And here are the, you know, the questions that you had. And, you know, and I was following these very strict templates, and I'm like, do these things even work? Like, is that what people really want us to recap? Because I'm pretty sure we were both there for the same conversation. They remember what features I showed them that add value, you know, and it's not to say that you shouldn't reinforce what you went over in the demo, but taking a much more conversational approach, you know, at it, and adding smiley faces if there was something that made me smile, and, you know, exclamation marks where, you know, I used to go back and almost erase that natural tone that I was using in emails. Whereas here I just, you know, okay, let me just roll it off my tongue, not use these like preset templates as much, and just be a little bit more authentic. And I started seeing some real results from there.
I love it. Yeah. I mean, I think that I call that, catching your sales groove is when like you go from trying to be something that you hear, you know what I mean? Like, okay, I need to be this is my template. This is my pitch. And then there's that moment where you kind of wake up a little bit and it's when you stop pitching your solutions and you start having conversations about your solutions. And to your point, Drift, natural conversation, like that's their whole ethos, right? Is that they try to change marketing from landing page, submit a form, let me call you with a templated response to, hey, it looks like you're interested. Let's have a conversation about this.
Yeah.
But without structure, a lot of that good conversation tends to fall on deaf ears, or at least not get followed through on, because like you have that really good initial vibe. But it's almost like, I had an engineer who I used to work with, and he said to me, he goes, after I left my company, he goes, John, he's like, I think I want to be, he was a CTO, he was my CTO of my first startup. And he was great in front of the client. And so after I left, he goes, John, I think I've reached my peak as a CTO of a small business from an earnings standpoint. And he's like, I really think I could be a great sales engineer and take my career to a whole nother level. I'm like, oh man, I think you'd be fantastic. I know you'd be fantastic as a sales engineer. And then he goes, because I think if I were to just get a bunch of people, get people to set me up on meetings and then do the follow-up afterwards, I think I'd be fantastic in sales. And I was like, yeah, I'm like, so would everybody else, my friend. Like what you're seeing in that moment, in that meeting, I'm not saying it's easy. I'm saying it literally is the easiest part of the sale, is having the conversation with the client. It's everything you do to get that conversation and everything you got to do to now follow up on that conversation. So
absolutely.
So that switch is a palpable one. And you, like you said, you start to see noticeable results when you make that shift from pitching to having a conversation.
Yeah, and part of it too, just to point out, it wasn't like I just, observed these two instances and all of a sudden made this shift and it just all started happening naturally. One of the big commitments I made was to actually studying sales. And, I always loved school. I studied finance and accounting undergrad, which is pretty much irrelevant now. Yeah. But that was the one thing that I knew I was good at, just investing time and really learning and looking at it more as something I was studying versus just this thing I was doing on the side. And so I started taking e-learning courses and reading every blog out there. I recently started listening to your podcast, which has some amazing, very specific topics like the questioning process or the preparation, and realizing that, wow, there is some very, very simple tactics that you can put in place to just be that much more prepared before meetings, such as writing down 3 questions beforehand that are very pertinent to them, right? So that you're not just, like you said, having a conversation that is great, you establish that bond, but at the end, you don't really leave that true value. So I think that's a big piece to point out, especially for folks like myself that might be transitioning from a different industry or might be transitioning from a different role, like the example you just gave from engineering to sales. Of course, some people just have it naturally in them. There's that EQ component, but understanding that, actually investing that time and studying it and reading as much as you can is really what has helped me the most, I'd say.
Yeah, I'm actually somewhat encouraged right now that back when I graduated college, there was no sales. You couldn't get your degree in sales, period. 5-6 years ago, there was about 20 or 30 universities. Now there's about 70. So you're starting to see sales become a profession that is educated, but historically it's been the default profession, which is why we all make it up as we go. And we have this perception based on movies like Glengarry Glen Ross, Wolf of Wall Street, and all that shit, that is what sales is, which I think, deters a lot of people from even getting into it. And unfortunately, is a perception we have to break down when we as sales professionals are having conversations with clients, because that is their perception of us. And the easiest way to break that perception is by doing your fucking homework, you know what I mean? And not pitching your shit, because at the end of the day, they don't care about you, they care about them, right? So I love it. And actually, so I'm excited about this, by the way, to try to address the lack of education in sales and get people introduced to it early. I'm actually, I'm finally writing a book. Everybody's like, oh, when are you going to write your book?
Wow.
But it's not going to be a book that everybody is used to as far as sales. Because what am I going to write that hasn't been written, right? And I'm kind of a hypocrite. Even though I love learning, I don't really like reading all that much, especially books. I think most books are full of shit. But I'm writing a book. It's a children's book, and it's called "I Want to Be in Sales When I Grow Up." And it's based on my daughter. It's based on my daughter, who I want to get more women into. I want to help more women get into sales.
Yeah.
It's her journey of selling Girl Scout cookies, and it's about like learning the fundamentals really, really early. So I'm super amped to get that thing up.
That's amazing. Yeah, that's great, and that's amazing. Yeah, I think getting, especially women, from an early age in the mindset, and that's goes back to STEM as well. Like there's still despite the I think equality going on, which is absolutely amazing. I think we've made great strides overall, specifically in the United States. I do think that there's still some barriers at a young age that are put where, hey, here's, okay, police officer and firefighter. And like, there's still these gender differences around like, this is what you should do as a grown up versus what your, brother should do as a grown up. So I think that's really great because, I sometimes joke that I wish I'd been an engineer.
Right.
I wish I'd studied that because my mind kind of things like that. And I really enjoyed it. And there was no girl I knew that was going into that. I was like, well, I'm not gonna go and study with all guys. I'll do finance because that's definitely more balanced.
Oh, absolutely, right. And let's chat about that if you don't mind, because to me, I agree with you. I think as on whole, we're doing better as a society. We're nowhere near where I think we should be, and from an equality standpoint, and that's frustrating for me to see. But what advice would you give to a woman in sales, for instance, who's trying to find their voice, if you will, and living in, especially in tech sales? I mean, let's call it what it is. It's, I go in to do trainings and it's 80% male, and it's usually a pretty hardcore, I wouldn't say hardcore. It's not like Wolf of Wall Street anymore, but it is definitely masculine as far as banging the gong and da, 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 da. And I'm not saying women don't do that. They don't
afterwards. There's a lot of that.
Right. So what advice do you give to young women from a developmental standpoint in sales or in business in general to help them find their voice? Like, is there any thoughts that you have around like how you did it or any things that I don't know, that I'm just searching for something to help somebody take that step like you did when you made that connection that I can do this and I belong here and I have a voice. And it's not just leaning in, it's like my wife, we went and saw Sheryl Sandberg at Dreamforce when she was at Dreamforce, and she had the whole book Leaning In, right? Which was great. But my wife sat there and she's Sicilian and Swedish. So she's fire. She's, I'm the mellow one in our relationship. But she said to me, she goes, yeah, lean in. She's like, fuck this whole leaning in thing. I'm standing up. And that's just my wife. Like, my wife does not give a shit. She's like, you could be, the president. Well, you could be a president of an organization, and she could tell you straight to your face, like, she has no problem. But how do you help women who don't have that inherent, like, I got that confidence and fuck it, I don't care, because they're trying to build their careers?
Yeah. So, I think I've struggled a lot with confidence in the past. Some of it roots back to, middle school bullying, which sounds so silly, but ultimately, it does leave scars for you later on. And so I've had some major shifts. I moved from Switzerland to the Bahamas as a teenager, very, very different worlds. And it was, kind of hard to figure out, how to fit in, let's say. So I was always trying to fit in. And then in college, when I was looking at job opportunities, I was looking originally to go into investment banking. And the reason I didn't is because, I went on this finance tour and just looking at the floor, it was all men in finance. and I became really intimidated. And then, fast forward when I started working at Realty Shares, something really special happened. And I do think it's partly attributed to the fact that it was a startup. And so there's just a lot less rules there in terms of your ability to kind of ascend. But our CEO at the time, one of the things I respected about him the most is that he did not discriminate based on experience, age, or gender. If you had an opinion and you were willing to share it, and you had some sort of, whether it was research or you'd spoken to people, like there was validation behind it. There was an open floor for it. And so, slowly but surely I started, just voicing my opinions more and I was listened to, and every time there was a problem, I would contribute. And I slowly started breaking down this invisible barrier that I realized I had kind of inflicted on myself versus that was really there. And I think that's one of the challenges right now for a lot of women. We have these misconceptions that, oh, well, these careers are only for men, or, in order to become X, I need to do Y first. When in reality, we're living in a decade, a century where there's so much opportunity out there. There's so many different ways that you can make your own. You can go into sales because you're fresh out of college and you went there. I'm part of this sales training and coaching program right now where there's this kid, he's 19, he's in college, he sells for Cutco, and I've learned more from him as a younger individual in the workforce than some of my, peers that had 3 decades of experience.
Yeah.
So I think, I don't know if it's advice per se, but I'd say, just find mentors, find some people that inspire you, whether they're men or women in that industry, and, ask to grab coffee, talk to them and understand their journey and how they got there. And the biggest thing you'll find out is every single person, even if they ended at the same result, has a different way of getting there. And I think that's a big lesson to remember, whether you started off in sales, whether you're just trying to get into sales now, there's nothing holding you back from doing it. Find someone to look up to, find something that you're truly passionate about selling. I think that's one of a big holdback. I could go into selling lead pipes. I could probably, I could spend a lot of time, a lot of investment into it, but, is that something that's going to fulfill me day in and day out? Probably not, right? So find something that you're truly passionate about and find some mentors to look up to, because ultimately, we're living in a world where there are still barriers, but they're a lot less than they used to be. And it's up to us to really break those barriers further and show that there is a place in sales for women, and that there is a place for that more female energy that many actually, I'm seeing a lot more men adopt, like you said, the empathetic nature, that trust, and like leading with that versus leading with like, hey, let me show you why this is going to be such an amazing product. And I think they'll see more opportunity than you'd expect.
Nah, I think you're right. Have you seen the Gillette commercial?
No. Did it play yesterday?
It wasn't on the Super Bowl. This was about a month ago, and it's a big, go look on it after this. It's like what a real man is. And it's the, the exact opposite of what the perception is. And they've gotten a lot of shit for it, but I think it's exactly where we need to go, right? Is blending the masculinity, if you will, of confidence with the empathetic, female energy, to really create the best of both worlds. And I think that's what we need to support way more of these days. And you said something in there that I found interesting, which I think is important for people to think of with the leader, the CEO that you said didn't matter race, creed, or color type of scenario. He said, as long as if you had an opinion, share it, as long as you could back it up with some data, with some facts.
Yeah.
And I think that's critical for anybody out there, men or women. We need to a certain degree, it's almost like you want to take the emotion out of it, but also keep it in a different way. Like, it's like forecast reviews. I used to call forecast reviews story time, right? Which is because they were all a bunch of stories. And I wouldn't let my reps use the words feel or think in the conversation. Because look, objectively, what do we have here? And then let's talk about how you feel about this, okay? But when we lead with, well, I feel like this is a really good deal, or I feel like this, or I think this is a good opportunity,
yeah.
What's the data that backs that up? Okay. So it's kind of like when we get upset in a meeting or when we feel frustrated, a lot of times the way we react is based on how we feel about the situation. Whereas if we took a step back, took that feeling, articulated it in a factual based conversation with data to support it, most people would be a lot more open to that conversation, because it's hard for me to do something about how you feel about something. You know what I mean? It's easier for me as somebody receiving your feelings to look in, well, what was the thing that created that feeling, right? Yeah. And if you have some data to back it up, and then obviously a solution to address it, so you're not just complaining, that's where I think it opens up a lot of doors, right?
And that is a big piece of it. The solution, like you just said at the end, bringing up, hey guys, I'm observing there's this big problem. Here's why it's a problem, and then not offering some sort of a solution, or in best case multiple solutions, is I think a big reason why some people kind of are perceived as this, quote unquote, Debbie Downer, in a sense, because great, you're identifying these problems. Yes, we all realize that there's a big problem with our marketing ads right now. We realize that there's a big issue. There's so many different things to complain about every day and to blame as to why things aren't working the way they are. But I think one of the things that really worked well for me, and that's what I enjoy, is thinking, well, not just one solution, but like, what are all the different ways we can solve it? So you're bringing to the table, like, hey, have we tried this? Have we tried this? Like, who would be the right person to lead this initiative, and why might this work? And like you said, backing it with data and looking at other examples. And I think that's a big piece of kind of climbing that ladder and getting respect from people that are much more experienced and higher than you in the organization, even when you might not otherwise have, a place to do that, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. So how do you foster that over, now that you're the CEO, and you're kind of on the other side, right? Because you're now leading an organization. A lot of times I used to tell my reps, no, I want you to challenge me. I want you to challenge me. But it was just words, right? But, a 25-year-old kid challenging, a 22-year-old kid challenging a CEO or a VP of sales, that's no matter how much I tell you, challenge me. Okay, John, sure. You know what I mean? So how are you currently fostering that openness, that, hey, we're all on the same page here? Is there anything specific you're doing over at Spekit?
Well, I think there's, you need to have those open forums. One of the things I realized is I was doing it wrong. We use Slack, and we use Slack because we have a significantly remote team, and it's the easiest way to kind of, have those conversations. And again, going back to Drift, David Cancel and Dave had a podcast episode where they talked about how they were wrongly utilizing Slack too, where basically they were using it for all instant messaging as well as for conversations that might be better suited for email, such as feedback, right? If there's a real, if you want an opinion that has been thought through by one of your employees, asking it over Slack and being like, hey, this happened today, what do you guys think about it? You're probably not going to get that thoughtful response from them. And so one of the things we shifted to is anything that I wanted someone's thoughtful response on, or anything that was a big challenge or a big issue, we would switch to email and use that instead. And then in some cases, switch to the phone as well. But I think that kind of gave room for people to really share a more thoughtful response versus the default of Slack. But another one, actually, one of the people I've learned the most from is from our intern. He's still in college. He's marketing, and he's a go-getter, and he's learned so much in so little time because he's shown that initiative. And we set up one-on-one. So there's forums for him to talk about more so like, hey, how are we doing as a relationship? Am I supporting you enough? And one of the things I realized is, he was committing 15 hours a week to us, but there wasn't any sort of schedule. So I was expecting this, this fresh, young employee to have the same amount of self-discipline that someone like I do. And that wasn't working as well. Whereas now we have a fixed schedule. He works certain hours and he's doing incredibly well. But I think it's just, like you said, developing that relationship, that rapport, getting on Zoom. When he proposes something, I'm always ready to listen. And sometimes I'll push back and say, hey, this cost doesn't make sense right now. Or did you think about this? Or, what alternatives did you look at? This solution looks great, but sell me on it, right? Like, why this solution? Why Drift? Why not Intercom? Why Yesware? Why not Outreach? You name it, and get that information. So I think that's a big piece of it. And just making sure that they know that there's that open channel of communication, that if there's a chat, even if there's a problem, that we can hop on the phone and talk it out.
And I think that culture is so important to be successful as an organization. The collaboration, right? No matter if you're the janitor or the CEO, if you're all on the same page, moving and helping each other, it makes the journey a lot easier and a lot more effective too.
Yeah, and I think that's a big piece too, realizing that every employee has that opportunity to rise up. At our last organization, seeing how different people kind of morphed into their ideal role, we saw a ton of, obviously, vertical shifts, but horizontal shifts as well, from people shifting, like you said, from an engineer to sales. And I think every career, the reality is 10 years decreasing, right? People are shifting jobs more and more. Remote work is opening more opportunities, to keep those employees. Like, they need to have a greater purpose than just going in and selling every day or going in and building product, right? No matter how passionate they are, they need to feel like they're part of something bigger than that. And I think the biggest way to do that is to, hey, here's this random challenge. You're not part of it at all, but like, let's just think through it. Let's go to the whiteboards and think through why, why did this client respond this way? Or why did this customer support issue stand up? And foster that communication, not just with the team responsible for solving it, but with other folks in the organization as well.
Yeah, I mean, I always say you cannot, as a leader, you can't get anybody to do more than their job unless you paint a vision, right? Yeah. If they don't understand where you're going and how they fit in and that type of stuff, they're just going to do what they're being asked of, which is fine in some cases. You know what I mean? Sometimes you just need, at a certain size of an organization, you just need people to do their job. But if you want them to do more than that, if you don't get them bought into the bigger picture and have them feel a part of it, good luck. So cool. Well, any, just in the last few minutes we have here, any questions? I know you threw a couple on there, but any questions or things you want to pick my brain about? Flip it over.
Yeah, I'd actually love to hear your thoughts on business. So we're just getting started with our, sales team. Now we're a few months in, we're ready to start building out our sales force. And one of the, I moved to Colorado because I want to build out our sales and marketing operations team here. And I'm set on having our AEs in-house. Absolutely. I want them to be part of the organization. But, I've read a lot about organizations that have successfully outsourced their biz dev functions. And, there's the cost savings component, but there's also an efficiency to it as well, right? Where, hey, I don't actually have a background in sales, so I can learn what proper outbound strategy looks like, or I could leverage this company that's experts there and I just have to train them on why Spekit and why our value, et cetera. So what are your thoughts on that from an outsourcing?
Yeah, if you'd asked me 5 or 6 years ago, I'd say absolutely not. Run away from it like the plague, right? Because too many of them were like script oriented, where if they said this, then say that. And if they say this, then say that. And that goes back to our conversation about the pitch versus the conversation. Yeah. Right? Now, though, I think it depends on your target audience and your IC, and that ideal customer profile and the personas that you're going after, and also what your thought process is on the progression of the growth of your sales team. Because the benefit of that segmentation is that you bring people in young, if you will, you get them, making calls and that type of stuff, and then they evolve into an AE that is a fully rounded AE and that type of thing. But to your point earlier about so many people have so many different jobs these days and they're bouncing around all over the place, you really can't count on one sales rep to, be with you for 6-7 years until they produce like that. Ooh, there's that enterprise AE that I'm talking about, right? So I think it's a lot more viable these days. I would look at it as a little bit of and what I'm seeing at least right now with the artificial intelligence, because if you want to see the debate on this one, by the way.
Oh, I read it.
The one between InsideSales.com and yeah, okay.
LXI or whatever.
Yeah, that battle is going on, right? So Chad Burmeister and Gabe, right? They're literally going at each other on replacing SDRs 100% versus augmenting SDRs. I think it's the augmentation conversation. There's so many tools out there. And I actually think that the inbound, what you can do, I think you can start. I mean, what's the harm? You know what I mean? Identify your, it puts you through a very interesting exercise to really make sure you hone in on what your ICP is and what your value proposition, that type of thing. And it's a low cost, low risk scenario where, hey, 3-month contract, 6-month contract, see what happens. Whereas I think you can also take an intern, for instance, invest in some tools, because there's some crazy ass artificial intelligence going on right now as far as the insights that we can get with one person sending out targeted messages to a certain group, that instead of them being the preceder to a full-blown sales rep, they're more marketing operations, but they use the tools to optimize and really hone in on those emails and and then make a few phone calls for you. So I think as a small business, growing, if you will, looking for that next round of funding, it's worth, right now, it's actually, for the right company, it's worth taking a chance on 3-month engagement, see what they can do. 3 months is around the amount of time where you're going to start to see if they can produce results for you. And after that, you can kind of say, okay, we're moving in the right direction or the wrong direction, while you potentially look for somebody internally that can do a little bit of the triage of that initial. So for inbound leads that come, you're still going to need somebody at a lower level, if you will, to just triage those leads and set the right people up. So yeah. I think we are in a hybrid role right now. My personal opinion of where this is all going is that I actually think that inbound, because marketing automation is getting so much better and better at targeting and personalization, that it's going to drive inbound leads, that you're going to want somebody at a higher level than a 22-year-old kid out of college responding to, right? So you're going to want somebody who's got more customer success oriented, that can guide people through the conversation with some structure from a sales. Whereas the outbound cold call, that's still going to be the entree, but I actually think we're going to move back to more of the fully vetted, full cycle sales reps. So inside sales, but they have to find their own business, meet with their clients, and close their business into a certain territory. So that's kind of where I'm seeing the evolution go, is that the traditional SDR right now is moving under marketing and operations, whereas sales is going to be more of an inside sales function with a bunch of tools and a bunch of resources, but they're going to manage their whole book. So
yeah, I think that's a really good point. And you also brought up the customer success component, which I think is interesting, because we're seeing, a lot of organizations now, it used to be called customer support. Now it's called customer success. Actually, one of our advisors, Nicole, she's an expert in client experience, and she's seen a big shift too, where companies are investing more and more in customer success, because when it comes to acquiring a customer for the first time, you put so much effort into that marketing and that sales process, and there's just such a heavy cost associated with it. But when you think of the lifetime value of that customer and keeping them as a customer in a increasingly competitive market, right, where there's new tools, especially with the rate of technology, our solution might be the latest and greatest now, but in 5 years from now, it's going to feel like a dinosaur solution, right? So it's going to be up to us to innovate, but the reality is, how can we invest in that ongoing customer experience and not think of it as, oh, this is a support role, right? But instead, this is a continuous sales process. Like, I am investing my time, my energy, and that's definitely something that we've adopted. And I think we're going to start seeing a big shift as well in more organizations, where the balance between, at our last company, we had a couple support people and a huge sales force. I think we're going to start seeing those equalize a little bit more, because companies are shifting to that long-term relationship with that company, but also with that person. Because going back to what you were saying earlier, like, people are shifting jobs all the time. That investment you're making in that individual is not just for that company, right? Because this has already happened to us. 3 months into the conversation, that person's on to the next company, right? But all of a sudden, if you invest the right amount of time into developing that relationship, that might be 2 deals you get out of it, because even if that first deal wasn't, the ideal time, now this next one is. And so really focusing on that customer success and that ongoing relationship, not just with the business, but with that individual. Like, hey, what are some other challenges? Like, do you want to brainstorm? Like, how can we help you solve this further? I think is going to really differentiate some of these organizations from others.
Oh, 100%. I'm seeing it just on my end from a training. I'm seeing so many more clients pulling in customer success to their sales training. And it's funny, because customer success gets into customer success because they don't want to be in sales. And now they're all being asked to sell, right? Yeah. And this goes back to our original, of perception reality, which is, a lot of people have this perception of what sales is, but it's funny. I could do a sales training for like the sales team with a few customer success people in there, right? And I'll do everything I can throughout the day to be like, hey, this is how it relates to you, and right? But inevitably, they walk out and they say, oh, that was great, but I wish it was more a little customer success oriented. Now, if I do the exact same training, but just for customer success, and take the word sales out of the equation, just the word, but train the exact same content, they walk out going, holy shit, that was exactly what I was hoping for. I needed that. You know what I mean? It finally gives me some guidance and So it's this, we have to break this. I think we're shifting over, obviously, towards customer success, but having to quote unquote sell. But again, if you just take the word sales out of it, sales is customer success.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it's if you think about it the right way, you're helping. I said this before Christmas or the holidays when I left. I said, this is my parting thought, because I usually shut down the last 2 or 3 weeks of the year. And so here's my parting thing for y'all to think about, which is sales. I'm not trying to sell anybody anything, okay? At the end of the day, I'm either trying to help you solve problems or achieve your goals.
I like that.
Those are the two things I'm trying to do. And if I can't help you solve your problems, or your problems aren't big enough and your goals aren't aggressive enough, let's stop talking, because the likelihood of us doing business together is not going to be high if your goals aren't big enough and I can't help you get there, your problems aren't big enough and I can't help you solve them.
And think of it as a long game too, right? Because I think sometimes, like, one of the issues I was having is we were trying to get, X amount of revenue in X amount of time. And so I was so focused on meeting that goal that I was taking a much more short-term approach towards that sales process where, as soon as I did start following up, I was almost following up too aggressively, like, hey, have you heard back yet? And being pushy simply because I had my own personal incentives. And that was taken away from me really thinking of what was best for the customer. Like, what does that client need? Like, why does this quarter maybe not make sense for them from an implementation standpoint? Why should we focus on next quarter instead? Mm-hmm. And I think that comes from, again, thinking more like long-term with that client and thinking, well, hopefully your pipeline's abundant enough that you're not, so short-sighted that you're focused on that immediate, that one client is going to be the death to your goal, mm-hmm. But really focusing on, what's best for the client and ensuring that you're thinking long-term for them and what's going to lead to a successful relationship versus you meeting that short-term quota that you set as an organization.
Yeah, I mean, you just kind of hit on the last point, which is, prospecting, right? Use the pipeline. If there's anybody out there listening at the one skill you can get great at throughout your entire career, it's always prospect, always network so that you can have a big fat pipeline, because a big fat pipeline solves every other problem. It's negotiation, because you put yourself in a position where you want their business, you don't need it. Yeah. And when you want it, you sell the right way. When you need it, you do some shady shit. So that's why I'd just keep prospecting. Even if your pipeline's full, keep doing it, because it puts you in a much better position to sell the right way. Right? So awesome. Any other questions or comments before we wrap things up?
No, I think it was great chatting with you. I'm excited. I've learned so much preparing for this podcast too. I probably listened to 25 episodes to make it happen in the last week. So a very concentrated amount. And it's been fascinating, especially not coming from a sales background. I think for anyone listening, if this is your first time, because I sent you the link to go listen to it, put the time in, whether you're from a sales background or not. I think there's just a lot of wisdom there. Like you said, a lot of tactic, advice, not just for sales folks, but for leaders as well. And yeah, just keep it up, because it's been really, really helpful to me. So.
I appreciate that, Melanie. I appreciate this conversation. I love what you're doing. You and me are going to have another conversation offline about just-in-time learning and where that hole is going, because that's literally my big picture strategy here. So we'll connect after this. But tell people where they can find out more information about you and how they can follow you and what you're up to these days.
Awesome. Well, at any point in time, feel free to email me, Melanie, MELANIE @Spekit, SPEKIT.co. Or, check out our website. We have a couple different solutions, both towards, just-in-time learning, knowledge management, as well as a data dictionary, which is our more technical solution. And then, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, would love to network, and I'll be attending a bunch of conferences this year. SaaStr coming up, which I'm super excited about, Dreamforce, and a ton of others in the sales. So if you see me, say hi.
Very cool. Awesome. Well, Melanie, thank you so much. Keep doing what you're doing. And everybody out there, as I usually say, go try to make somebody smile today. There's too much negative bullshit going on. So just try to make a difference in somebody's life today. Make them smile. That'll be a success. Even if you're having a bad day, you can make somebody else smile. You had a good day. So appreciate everybody's support, and thanks everybody. Make it happen. All right. Make it a great week. Cheers.
Thank you.
No problem.